things nonprofits. I will be broadcasting every Tuesday to share information and insight about nonprofits, provide some transparency as a nonprofit founder, and hopefully move you from off the fence of starting a nonprofit so that you are dedicating yourself to the purpose that is in you to serve others. The main priority of nonprofits is to serve others, and so I want to activate you into that purpose if that is what you are supposed to be doing. So today's topic is things that you should know or things to have in mind before your organization expands. So, from my experience recently, we have been getting an increase in our funding. And what I've been doing is I've sat back and said, well, what are we going to do with this increase in funding? So we've created a budget that was to go towards our different programs, to go towards different resources that we provide to our communities, to go towards administration. These are some of the brackets that fall under nonprofits. And so when that happened, I decided to sit back and say, okay, so let me think about this first before I decide to embark on something. Because the reality is when you decide to do something differently, when you decide that you are ready to expand, you have to realize that there's going to be a certain level of commitment that comes with it. So one of the commitments is capacity. Do you have the capacity to handle the expansion of your program, the expansion of your service? What does the expansion of program or services look like? So for my organization, Dare Humanity, we have the initial 7 students that we sponsored for 2019. This year we said we're going to sponsor an additional 20. Of those 25 of them have already been selected, and then we're going to continue to select the other 15 for the organization. So when I decided to expand because of the influx of donations and funding that's coming in, I said to myself, well, what systems need to be in place in order to do that? How are we going to monitor these additional 25 students or 20 students? How are we going to handle the money that's coming in? How are we going to ensure that we're keeping track of the money that is sent to pay the tuition, or money that is sent to pay for the transportation, or the money that is sent to get resources to our students? Another way to look at this is on the level of services that your nonprofit offers. If your service is to offer free therapy sessions on Saturdays to women of color, then you have to realize, what is that going to mean? Is that going to mean that you're going to increase the amount of times you're going to have these sessions? Is it just going to be Saturday and maybe you'll extend it for the staff, or you're going to have it periodically throughout the week? And then you're going to have to consider, okay, so if we're having it periodically throughout the week, then what does that mean for our staff? Are the staff going to be available? Are we going to be able to pay our staff because of the increase? So you have to think about your capacity when it comes to expanding your organization before you start to jump on things and say, oh, well, now we have the capacity to get a grant writer. You have to realize, let's back up a bit. When it comes to funding for your nonprofit organization, you can get funding that's outside of just getting grants, which means you can get funding through individual donations. My organization, all of our funding comes in through individual donations, and then we also have in-kind donations, which are when people buy stuff or they have excess of stuff that's gently used or not even opened, and they decide to give that to the organization. So our organization for now is running primarily on individual donations, people who want to give out of the generosity of their heart, whether it's a monthly basis or it's an individual basis. Then your funding can also come through foundations. Foundations are the organizations who give the funding to the nonprofits in order to accomplish their mission. So there are the community foundations, and then there are the foundations that are private foundations and community foundations often are started by families who have a certain amount of money that they want to pour into a certain focus. So say there's a family foundation, say it's the Chavez Foundation. The Chavez Family Foundation, and this foundation wants to give to programs and services that serve women in India in order to enhance their understanding of being a parent. This is just an example. Then they will seek out companies, seek out organizations that have a mission with that is in alignment with this in order to provide funding. The reality is also that a lot of foundations, they have restrictions on the people they give their funding to. So often they'll only give funding to people who have organizations that have been in existence for a minimum amount of time. So if you are a new nonprofit that's starting up, it may be a bit of a challenge to get fundraising or to get funds that fall into this bracket, which is foundations. But there are some that will give to nonprofits in their early stages. Another way, so we're on number 3. We said number 1 is individual donations. We said number 2 is foundations. Number 3 is getting corporations to sponsor and give on an annual basis. So sponsorships from corporations look like you're having an event for youth, a summer program, and they say, well, let's give this organization $500 for this program. So they choose to sponsor something specific. So it's an event, it's a program for a certain period of time. So that's another way that funding comes in. And then corporations and businesses, they may decide, you know what, we want to provide funding on a regular basis, so we're going to do this annually and we're going to give to your organization annually. And so those are the first 3 ways. The final way is to get funding from the government. So like I said with foundations and how there is some restriction on how you can get access to foundations giving to your organization, it is even more restricted for government because it is the government. They're going to require you to do certain things. They're going to require you to have a level of being able to represent and have evaluations about the effectiveness of your programs and services, the effectiveness of your organization and what you're doing. And so I don't want to discourage you from at some point wanting to seek funding from a grant, from a foundation or from the government. But what I'm saying is that you need to have the results and the outcomes in order to be able to express the need, because that's what they're going to be asking for. So if you are a nonprofit that is just starting out, you can tap into individual donations. As soon as you get your tax exempt status, you can tap into that. This is something that can be started immediately. Often there is this misconception that getting funding for your nonprofit is not going to be easy. And yes, it is a challenge, but you have to realize that you have a network of people, and all you have to do is make the ask. You have to ask them and share the work that you're doing, and people will give. They will give to your organization. So you have to realize that. Don't let that discourage you from starting your nonprofit. So back to expansion. One thing about the level of funding that's coming in, whether it's coming through individual donations, foundations, corporations or businesses, or the government, is that they're going to require you to report on a regular basis. They want to see that the funding that they send and grant to you is being used as it's supposed to be used. Is the intention still the same? Are you still using it for the after school program, for example? So they're going to require you to report on a regular basis. So you'll have to keep that in mind. And we also talked about systems. If you do not have systems in place, then how are you going to keep track of things? One of the systems I implemented based on what I learned from one of the organizations I was basically working for a project for during my graduate school is tracking donations. And this is one of the systems that is important to implement as soon as possible, because, for example, if you do not open up a separate bank account for your organization and you decide to just have the donations come into your account, how are you going to be able to determine where they're coming from, and who sent them. And then you're going to be commingling your funds. And then that leads to the possibility of you misusing the funds. So that's one of the things you want to start and open up in your first stages is a bank account for your organization, because you don't want to be commingling. You don't want to have the state of California and the IRS a reason. You don't want to give them a reason to be able to say that you no longer deserve your tax exempt status, because once that is taken, it's hard to gain back. So those systems are going to help you with tracking your donations. Other systems that I put in place is tracking the students that we sponsor for our schools. You'll want to track the intake of certain things. So if you're serving some students and new students are coming in, you'd want to keep track of their data. You want to keep track of the services and the hours. If you're paying staff, even if they're international, you want to keep track of that. How much money was sent? What day was it sent? What is their salary? How many hours have they been teaching your students that you are sponsoring? So you have to have these systems in place so that you are able to keep track of the things you're doing and eventually apply for those grants from foundations and the government, like I was saying. Another thing you want to realize is that as your expansion increases, your staff and the people that are able to help you hands-on is going to need to be increased as well. So if you're saying, okay, we have this influx of income that's coming in, do we want to hire someone? Do we want to bring on our first staff or bring on staff or additional staff? The reality is that you're going to have to create a whole nother system for HR, human resources. You're going to need to figure out what it takes to have a staff member on. Nonprofit organizations are tax exempt, but they are not exempt from state taxes when it comes to payroll. They're not exempt from sales taxes. These are just a few of them. So if you're thinking about hiring staff, or you are the founder, the executive director, and you are moving into a stage of being compensated for what you're doing, you have to do the research about what it's going to take to have an employment piece in there and to have you as an employee, because that is a whole another thing that you have to gain awareness about. So realizing your capacity, what is this going to mean for us when our funds increase? How do we want to expand? Do we have the people in place? Is it going to be interns? How long are we going to have these interns? Because personally, I do not believe in exploiting interns, because I was an intern for 3 years for one of my roles, and I just continue to not get paid. So you want to be fair about that. And then when it comes to reporting, this is number 2. Reporting, you're going to want to report to the individuals that are giving to you. One thing I didn't mention is that even when you get the individual donations, you still have to report to them in a certain sense. So when a donation comes into your organization, that donation is going to be tracked. This goes back to your system. You're going to have an Excel file. Maybe you'll pay for software, but you're going to have a system, and you're going to say, John Doe gave us $25 on July 7th. And this is his email. This is where it came from. What platform did it come from? Did it come from our website? Did it come from something else? And then you're going to say, okay, now we need to acknowledge his donation. So this donation that comes in, you need to acknowledge it. And that is basically saying, thank you, John Doe, for your donation on July 7th. Now that you've given your donation, we just appreciate it, and we want to acknowledge it and thank you for what you're doing for our organization. And then you put your EIN number for your organization, and then you give that to them, whether it's via email or your mail. So that's part of having a reporting system for individual donations that come in. You have to acknowledge their donation, and you have to acknowledge it in a timely manner, which is usually between 72 hours from receiving the donation. So if we go on to the reporting for foundations and for the government, you have to realize that they're going to be asking on an annual basis to provide them with a list of outcomes. What did the money do? How much money was spent where? How many participants were there? What was their feedback? How did you do an evaluation? These are just some of the things that you're going to want to report. And then finally, the third thing when you're thinking about expanding your organization is systems. And we talked about this and we've been talking about it because it's really important, because you have to have your systems in place and to make sure that you're doing things efficiently. When it comes to your finances, when it comes to your data, when it comes to people you're serving, you need to keep track of that. And then when it comes to human resources. So these are just some of the things that should be involved in your systems. And I want to encourage you, if you're on the fence about starting a nonprofit, to do it, because there are people that are connected to you that are looking and waiting for you to start the work that you're doing, because there may be the chance that someone is not receiving what they need somewhere else. Another nonprofit maybe doesn't provide this service, and when your nonprofit steps in, you're going to be able to start this service for them and serve them. So that's all for the nonprofit plug. I feel like I gave you a lot of information. It was kind of like a like a half seminar, so you're welcome. Because this type of stuff, information, is usually something you have to do research on your own, or you usually have to pay someone to do. But I don't care about that. I feel that it's important for you to know these things, because some people don't let you know these things. You'll go to a seminar, you go to a conference, and they're giving you surface level information, and then you leave and you're like, okay, well, that's fine. And that information applied to a $1 million organization, but our organization isn't that big. So how is that going to apply to us? So I want to be as transparent as I can in the early stages of starting my nonprofit, and as we expand and continue to expand, to be able to provide additional insight along the way. So if this is your first time watching on YouTube or wherever you're watching from, make sure to share it with someone, give it a thumbs up, follow, because every Tuesday, and I'm still thinking about how that's going to happen when I go to Haiti, July 23rd, but we'll figure it out. Every Tuesday, the Nonprofit Plug will be here. We'll talk about different subjects. And you can also connect with me on KiaHarris.com. Follow me on social media. If you are interested in a strategy session, a free 30-minute strategy session about whatever topic you'd like, you can visit KiaHarris.com and type in the information, let me know, and we could connect and decide on a time that's best for us, for both of us. And then, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. If you happen to be one of the people that I speak to on my seminars, hello, can't wait to see you again for another seminar. So thank you for sharing, thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.